Now we are going to see how the variation of the length of the menstrual periods affects the estimated due date with Naegele's rule. So here we have three examples of menstrual cycle duration. Here we have a menstrual cycle duration of 21 days. Here a menstrual cycle duration of 28 days. Here 35 days. So in the previous video we already see why the Naegele rule is 40 weeks plus the last menstrual period. This is going to be the due date, but physiologically is 38 weeks. 38 weeks plus or after the conception date is going to be the estimated due date. Other way to think about Naegele's rule is last menstrual period plus 9 months plus 1 week, or is the same as last menstrual period plus 3 months plus 1 week, and we subtract a year. So last menstrual period plus 9 months plus 1 week, or last menstrual period plus 3 months and 1 week, and then we add a year. This is the same. So in the previous video we saw if this is the menstrual cycle. Here we have a 28-day long menstrual cycle. Here we have week 1 of the menstrual cycle, week 2 of the menstrual cycle. All these correspond to the proliferative phase. This is proliferative phase. Here is menstruation, proliferative phase. Then we have the LH surge. So here is ovulation. If it happens, here will be ovulation. Then we have week 3 of the menstrual cycle, week 4. And if no conception occur after the ovulation, if no conception occur, then after 4 weeks of the menstrual cycle, we have menstruation again. So again, the cycle starts week 1 of the menstrual cycle, which is menstruation. Week 2 of the menstrual cycle, here we're in the proliferative phase. Week 3 of the menstrual cycle, which now is after ovulation has occurred. Here ovulation occurred. So week 3 of the menstrual cycle, week 4 of the menstrual cycle. Again, this is the secretory phase, when we have predominance of LH hormone. Here we have predominance of the FSH hormone. Again, if no conception occur, then we have menstruation again. In fact, I'm going to write menstruation in purple. So here the menstruation started. Here menstruation started. So we have again week 1, week 2 of the menstrual cycle, week 3, week 4, which is the secretory phase, and then we will have menstruation again if no pregnancy has occurred. Here this is a 28 cycle, so all this is a cycle, all this is a cycle, and all this is a cycle, each one of 28 days. So the secretory phase, which is the LH phase, is 14 days long, and the FSH phase or the proliferative phase is 14 days long. 14 days long. So if the due date is 38 weeks after conception. So if ovulation occurs here, ovulation occurred here and conception occurred, so plus conception, so the due date is going to be this date, ovulation date or conception date, plus 38 weeks. That's going to be, let's say, here, and this is the due date. But if the woman does not know when was conception date, she may know when was the last menstrual period. So this was the last menstrual period, because if conception occurred here, so starting from here there is not going to be menstruation again until the pregnancy ends. So if this was the last menstrual period, how apart is the last menstrual period from the conception date? Is 2 weeks apart, which corresponds to the 2 weeks of the proliferative phase or of the FSH phase. So starting from the last menstrual date is last menstrual period plus this same amount, which is 38 weeks, plus the difference between last menstrual period and conception, which is 2 weeks. So this is the reason for which Nagele rules is last menstrual period plus 38 plus 2 weeks, which is 40 weeks. And so this is the estimated due date based on last menstrual period and not conception, which obviously conception date would be more accurate, but most of the time we don't know when was the conception date. And now let's see how the variation in the normal variation of the menstrual cycle duration affects the estimated due date with Nagele's rule. So here we have a 21 day duration cycle, 28 and 35. So here this is the same as this. We have only this is one cycle. LH or secretory phase always is constant, so we always have 14 days or 2 weeks of LH. So this is week 1 of the menstrual cycle, which is where menses occur. Then proliferative phase, which is week 2, week 3, and week 4 is the secretory phase, which is 14 days of secretory phase. So here ovulation started here. In this case we have a 21 day long menstrual cycle, which is divided into 14 days or 2 weeks of secretory phase. And if this is 21 weeks and 2 weeks correspond to the secretory phase, so 1 week corresponds to the proliferative phase. So week 1 is the proliferative phase or FSH phase, and these 2 weeks are the secretory phase, week 3, week 2, and week 3. Here in this 35 days menstrual cycle, again 14 days correspond to the secretory phase. And so if this is 35 days and 14 days correspond to secretory phase, so 35 minus 14 is 21 days correspond to the FSH phase or the proliferative phase. So week 1 will be like menses, and this is proliferative phase, week 1, week 2, week 3, and secretory phase could be week 4 and week 5. So now, independently of the duration of the menstrual cycle, always the due date is going to be the conception date plus 38 weeks. So here the conception date will be this ovulation date plus 38 weeks. Here ovulation occurs here between proliferative phase and secretory phase. The estimated due date would be conception date, which is here, plus 38 weeks. Here the same. Here is ovulation, and if conception occurs, then the due date would be 38 weeks from the ovulation, from the conception date. But we don't measure, we cannot measure it with the conception date because we don't know when does that occur. So we measure the gestational weeks and the due date based on the last menstrual period. So here we already saw that if here was the last menstrual period, as in this case the last menstrual period was in this case last menstrual period was here. So between, in this case the last menstrual period was here, between this cycle and this cycle. In the middle of this cycle occur conception. So last menstrual period is after the secretory phase and starting the proliferative phase. So here is the same. In this 28-day cycle, here we are starting a proliferative phase. Here would be finishing the secretory phase, and again proliferative phase, secretory phase, and so on. Here ovulation occurred, so here was the last menstrual cycle, and it's the same as this, just that here I have not written the previous cycle, but it's the same. Here is the last menstrual period, and so estimated due date based on the last menstrual period would be the same duration of the pregnancy duration starting from the ovulation or conception date. So it would be the same amount, which is 38 weeks, plus the difference between last menstrual period and conception date, which is 2 weeks, week 1 and week 2 weeks, 14 days. So last menstrual period plus 38 weeks plus 2 weeks, which is the same as we got here. Last menstrual period plus 40 weeks. That will be the due date based on the last menstrual period in a 28-day long menstrual cycle. But this is different if we have this 3-week duration menstrual period. Here again ovulation occurred here, due date is going to be the same as this one, conception date plus 38 weeks. But if last menstrual period was here, I mean it's the same, starting the next cycle and finishing the previous cycle is the same as here. Here we're starting the proliferative phase, but if conception occurs here, so here we have menses, here was the last menstrual period. And if we applied Naegele's rule, which is the last menstrual period plus 40 weeks, truly the fetus, if everything goes fine, is going to be born earlier than this date, because the difference between the conception date and the last menstrual period in this case of 21-day long menstrual cycle is 1 week. So if in this case we were going to estimate the due date based on the last menstrual cycle, the correct mathematics would be last menstrual period plus again the 38 weeks, which corresponds to the duration of the pregnancy starting from conception, 38 weeks, plus the difference between the last menstrual period and the conception date, which is 1 week. So in this case, the due date would be last menstrual period plus 39 weeks. And Naegele's rule is a rule. I mean, we do not adjust Naegele's rule based on the duration of the menstrual cycle. It's just a rule we use just to estimate. But so if in this case we apply Naegele's rule, we would say, the due date would be whatever, April 9, 2024, whatever. But that is counting 48 weeks after last menstrual period, and we should have counted 39 weeks, because this is not a 28 duration cycle, it's a 21 day duration cycle. So in this case, because always we apply the same rule, if everything goes fine, the baby is going to be born earlier than the estimated due date with Naegele's rule, because of the short duration of the menstrual cycle. And the other way around, if we go to this case, we have 35-day duration menstrual cycle. Again, ovulation occurs between proliferate phase and secretory phase. Conception date is here. The duration of the pregnancy is going to be 38 weeks, starting from ovulation, I mean from conception. But if we apply Naegele's rule to this case, would be, I mean, if we do the correct arithmetic, would be last menstrual period, which was here. Here was the last menstrual period. Here was the last menstrual period. I mean, it's the same as here. It's starting this cycle and finishing this cycle. So, but this is a 35-day cycle. So, the correct arithmetic would be the last menstrual period plus 38 weeks, which is the duration of the pregnancy starting from conception date, plus the how many weeks is apart the last menstrual period from the conception date, which in this case is 3 weeks, so plus 3 weeks. So here the correct due date based on the last menstrual period would be last menstrual period plus 41 weeks. But we always apply Naegele's rule, which is 40 weeks. So if in this case we apply Naegele's rule, we would say, the due date would be last menstrual period plus 40 weeks. But indeed it's 41 weeks, because we have like an extra week of proliferative phase. So if we say based on last menstrual period plus 40 weeks, the due date is whatever, April 9 to 2024. Indeed, the due date would be 1 week after this, would be this last menstrual period plus 41 weeks, because it's last menstrual period, apart from conception date is 3 weeks, plus the normal 38 weeks duration of the pregnancy starting from conception. So if we always use Naegele's rule to estimate due date based on last menstrual period. Always is going to be last menstrual period plus 40 weeks. Other way to do it is last menstrual period plus 9 months plus 1 week, or last menstrual period plus 3 months plus 1 week plus 1 year is the same. But this was calculated or estimated based on a 28-day long menstrual cycle, when we have 14 days of secretory phase and 14 days of proliferative phase. If we have a woman that has a menstrual cycle duration of 21 days, we are going to calculate the estimated due date as always with 48 weeks, but indeed the baby is going to born earlier than the estimated due date with Naegele's rule. So if menstrual cycle is shorter than 28 days, the due date is going to be before 40 weeks, starting from the last menstrual period. Always is going to be 38 weeks starting from the conception date. The other way around, if we have a menstrual cycle of 35 days, we are going to calculate the estimated due date with Naegele's rule, which is with 40 weeks after last menstrual period, but indeed the due date is going to be after the estimated due date, because we have an extra week in this case. So if we have a menstrual cycle which has longer duration than 28 days, the estimated due date is going to be before the actual due date. I mean, the actual due date is going to be longer or after, is going to be after than the estimated due date. So again, estimated due date is always with 40 weeks starting from the last menstrual period, but not every woman is 28 days long in menstrual cycle. So the variation of the menstrual cycle affects the true due date, even though we always estimated with Naegele's rule, which is 40 weeks starting from the last menstrual period. Always independently of the duration of the menstrual cycle, always the duration of the pregnancy starting from the conception date, always going to be 38 weeks.